key steps. And it says before construction starts, because I am so biased. I'm like, once we get to construction, I'm like, what? Yep, that's easy. And if there's any contractors in the room, I'm sure they're nodding their head. That's not the case. But for developers, it really is. It's about getting the deal closed. It's about arriving at that closing table, signing documents, and starting construction. And then we're, on to the next one. So it really is. We're talking about this before construction starts, talking about feasibility, design and permitting, and financing as the three core areas that a developer is focused on, and trying to move all three of those things along throughout this process and keeping an eye on all of those. And one of the things we do is weigh the advancement on one versus another, looking at risks, looking at costs as we move those things forward. So when feasibility first begins, it's low cost, right? You're just looking at a piece of land, thinking about getting site control. You can do that work in-house with your own staff, looking at what the land use patterns are, meeting with your local zoning administrator or planning folks, looking at historically what that community has done, understanding the bylaws and regulations, understanding the capacities in that community for infrastructure, water and sewer, road, transportation, and other things. And that's all information that's, pretty widely available, either through meetings or online. There's so much information. And what you're trying to really understand is, what are the particular things about this parcel that are going to drive my fixed costs? And how many homes can I conceptually get on this parcel? Because you want to know how much you're going to pay for the parcel, what it's worth, and what your outcomes might be as you make those next steps. And these are things a developer does in-house. They're low cost, they're time intensive, but you're out there exploring. Once you are thinking you want to move ahead and you're gaining site controls, when you start to spend some money, right? You've got to get site control, so you're paying an attorney on a purchase and sale. You're going to be building a team to support you from externally, some of whom work for you, some of whom, like a financing or a lender, are helping you to secure the money. People need different kinds of information. So you'd be looking at a market study, which would inform, what the rents might be for the group that you want to rent to, what their needs might be, what amenities need to be there in order to make the property marketable. Your financing team is going to want to know that you've got a good proposal, that there is a demand for what you're trying to build. It might just tell you whether you're building 1-bedroom units or studios or 2 or 3-bedroom units. All those kinds of questions. Of course, you are getting an appraisal done, and there's legal work, looking at the title, looking at the boundary, looking at easements. Are there constraints on the property that you need to be aware of? And all of these things you're proceeding with at a pace that matches the other activities that you're doing in terms of the information you need, when is it demanded, when do you need it to answer the questions, to resolve your own plan and program and move the project forward. Advance it so you know more and more about the property. Other things that would happen in this first phase would be environmental studies, where you would have a phase 1 environmental study completed. If there's recognized environmental concerns on the property, lately we've been talking a lot about dirty soils, which are everywhere in Vermont and which are very costly to handle. That would then require a second or a phase 2 study, which can, depending upon the number and things that you're testing, can add up to many thousands of dollars just to understand it, let alone mitigate it. And then as you're moving again more close, you start to talk with and engage a civil engineer to look at things like, well, are there wetlands on the site? What do the soils look like? What is the infrastructure? The town says there's a new water line here or sewer line, and how does that impact it? Do we need pump stations? Do we, just trying to, again, understand the context of that particular site, the costs of developing that site. We're not even to kind of construction costs, but really it's a lot of work is done to identify that this is the parcel where I want to be. It's also going to engage questions around the marketability of the location, maybe transportation and job access, schools, and those kinds of things that affect, the value of that property. But concentrated on the kind of physical assets as you evaluate some of those things. So I'm going to throw up some numbers here, and I kind of hesitate to do this because numbers to me are like words to an author, right? You can you put them on a page and they tell a story, and then tomorrow when you want to alter the story, you change the words, you change the numbers. They paint a picture and they tell a story, but it's an ever-changing story. And so I don't want anybody to get too attached to any particular number, but conceptually, here we go. This is a pre-development budget that illustrates really the kind of cost categories that I just described, right? Legal and market and site feasibility, architects and engineers, and so forth. And so this phase one is cost in this instance about $100,000. And these numbers don't change very much by size, because if you do a market study, it costs the same whether you're doing one for 10 units or 300 units, right? There's some things like surveys may be bigger or less because they're bigger or less parcel. But so you're spending about $100,000 to kind of answer those questions, like, is this the right parcel for me? And that's why it's an incremental, iterative process. How much do I spend? What do I learn? Do I keep going? And that iterative process takes a long time. And at the end of it, before we're starting construction, we have spent $500,000. So there's a lot at risk before we're done. And the permit might arrive somewhere between the second and third phase. You might have a preliminary, you might have a feasibility, but your final permits really aren't done until you've spent that much money. This is a lot of money, and that's something that affects some of the decision making. This is just a different way of illustrating that, which is just saying at the beginning there's a lot of risk and uncertainty, but we haven't spent a whole lot of money. We start spending more money to control risk and uncertainty, and hopefully we get that risk and uncertainty down even as we start spending more, heading in towards, this is our construction, millions and millions of dollars in construction. Permitting is somewhere in here, where we're starting to spend a lot of money, but the risk and uncertainty isn't over yet. And what happens is that it's harder and harder, and it costs more money to make changes the later we go, right? So this was an illustration that Ernie Pomelo put together around permitting. I mean, what it really just tells you is it's complex. So we can go to the next one. I put on your table a list of permits just to say, like, this is the list of permits we look at when we start pricing things. And remember, as a checklist to our developers, like, make sure you find out, does the town have this kind of impact fee, that kind of impact fee? Like, ask the questions, because they doesn't always come through. So quickly, this is just sources and, it's just a uses rather, not a sources and uses. And just a little more detail from that pre-development budget. As again, this is a developer, so construction, I just got one line item plus a contingency. The construction budget and everything actually has 20 or more line items. But just to illustrate, this is really about some of the land costs and the soft costs. So in addition to the permitting and pre-development and all of those activities, there's also all the financing costs. So you'll see construction loan interest, third-party green certifications, our loan and lender fees. We have reserves, replacement reserves, lease-up and working capital reserves, and then a developer fee. So developers earn money for doing this work, and it's hard and risky work. And we earn money, generally developers earn money in 3 ways. One, they earn it here at the beginning as part of a fee that's incorporated into the total development costs. The other way is they can earn revenue over time as the property generates cash on an annual basis. The developer could be taking a return on investment annually. And then finally, there's an opportunity for a developer to earn money by recouping its equity and any appreciation that the property would have gained over time, just like you do as a homeowner. So let me jump onto the nonprofit side and try to be quick here on our time. But so I put this really plain, ordinary statement, right? We create housing for people who can't afford market rate housing. So nonprofits, we have our customer doesn't have enough money to pay the rent, and our costs are higher. Our rents aren't higher, but our capital costs are higher and our operating costs are higher. So we're really in a bind because we're trying to serve people who have less money, but our product is sort of more expensive in a lot of ways. And one of the reasons is from a policy consideration is we're trying to do a lot of things, and there are policies in place that add cost to our operations and add cost to the capital side. For example, this QAP, that stands for Qualified Allocation Plan. It's a policy that's set by the Housing Finance Agency. We have green building standards in that plan that are higher than state permits require. We have size of unit requirements. We have amenity requirements. We need to provide playgrounds to at our properties. There's a variety of physical aspects that we need to add. We're also serving people who are homeless. We're serving people who have special needs or provide services. And those are requirements that we are obligated to fulfill. And they also add costs, both at a physical side and an operational side. So we have costs added because of operating costs and compliance. We have annual audits that we're required because of the kind of financing we use. We have staffing related to compliance activities of income qualifications and meeting the requirements of our partnership agreements and of the IRS requirements. And then thirdly, I just want to note quickly, we also have a different financial model than the private sector, right? So I just talked about 3 ways a developer earns a fee. Well, nonprofit developers typically only earn a fee one way, right? We can earn a fee through the construction and the capitalization process. But typically we are not taking a return on investment on an annualized basis because we're plowing that money. If there is profit, it gets plowed back into the property or the operations of the nonprofit to fulfill its mission, to cover reserves. We have requirements for investors about taking resources. All right, and then, and we don't sell our properties. They are, in Vermont, affordable housing is restricted to permanent affordability, perpetual affordability. So there's no time in the future when we would have said, oh, now let's liquidate our asset, let's take a fee for that growth in its value, and we'll go invest that somewhere else. That doesn't happen. And so I'll quickly just show you what that means is if we had a $15 million example, when you add the nonprofit additions, it becomes, it's almost $2 million more. So from $250,000 a unit to $30,000 more a unit. A portion of that is construction costs. So it's about 10% more for us from not just those things I mentioned, but because we can't recapitalize, we tend to buy more durable goods. We tend to buy more durable heating systems, more durable windows, more durable roofing, because we don't have the capital to make those improvements in later years. And we have higher operating reserves. You know, this operating reserve is $300,000 because our investors require, remember, our residents don't have enough income to pay the rent at a market rate, and so there are reserves in place to help us offset some of those potential loss of rent from. So there's a number of costs that the nonprofit budget costs more for us to develop and operate. You know, we want everybody in the room, I think, wants to expedite the process and produce more affordable housing, and I'm really glad you're all here to have that conversation with us, because I'm really looking forward to the back and forth. I just think, well, density. Think about parking and density. Think about neighborhood level and density. I think about, like, my neighborhood, Redstone is building a building 2 blocks, a block and a half from my house. It's on a corner of Flint and Pine. there's lots of corners like that that are adjacent to single-family neighborhoods, that are even in single-family neighborhoods. And I could envision, having 20 or 24 unit buildings, periodically in a single-family neighborhood, and triplexes and duplexes and infill development and quality infrastructure. Those are all things I think towns have some role to play. And then in general, and then for permanently affordable housing, I advocate so strongly that towns establish affordable housing committees. They are an effective vehicle for supporting affordable housing, for making sure that it's not just this one-time thing when a project comes to town, but that it's sustained throughout the community, that lots of policies affect this or get affected by advocates, and that housing trust funds could be funded locally, and we could combine that with inclusionary zoning to make that more possible.